Container seems to be like the next thing that's going to be relevant in software development. And
yeah, I hear it's the future.
The tools are there to really make delivery of software continuous. And the way we think about software delivery has changed. The biggest thing is to understand that at every phase, you're like a little bit different company and you're going to have to reinvent yourself. There's something about being in successful companies that really helps you understand how it needs to be done when it's done right. If you wander around, you will never get anything done. And maybe each one of the things that we're doing were brilliant, but it doesn't matter because nobody gets to enjoy it.
The SATs are not a correlation with eventual success. I think so much of being successful is the ability to work well with other people.
No one in the industry knows what they're doing around interviewing.
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by HeavyBit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
So, Mariana, tell us, what is your favorite thing about continuous delivery?
So I think my favorite thing about continuous delivery is to think about how software development has evolved to get to this point, and how it used to be where you develop big discrete chunks, and now it's more of this continuing straight line. And actually, my favorite thing about that is to imagine what it will be, and think about how one day you're going to write a little chunk of software and get sucked into the system right away and work right away. And so, kind of imagining that we're still on this journey that's not complete is probably fascinating.
Well, one of my favorite people is here today, and I'd love for her to introduce herself.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Marianna Tessel. I work at Docker. I'm one of the executives there. I build and run the engineering team, and I'm actually helping with strategic partnership. And we announced a couple, and we're working on a few more. So kind of doing a little bit more strategy in business these days. And and before that, I should talk about my past. Yeah, so before that, I was at VMware for several years, and before that, I was at Ariba for several years. So kind of doing enterprise and infrastructure for a while. And before that, I was at a company called General Magic, which is actually has an interesting piece of the Valley history. Was trying to do iPhones long time ago. Was trying to basically personal devices, and it had a very interesting set of people, a lot of ex-Apple, and a lot of people that went off to do a lot of interesting things afterwards. So it was kind of an interesting upbringing in the Valley. And before that, I was actually in Israel, and my first engineering job was in the Israeli military.
Wow,
actually.
So that's really interesting evolution, because I mean you've seen the evolution from these huge multi-year releases to continuous delivery and even beyond. What are the biggest changes, and what do you think is driving this?
I think there's probably multiple changes, but obviously tooling and what's available is a huge one. If you take it all the way back, I don't know, even before kind of I was in the industry, when people did punch cards, like you had to really think about what you do. I guess then you're going to have to go somewhere where the card can be punched, and it has to be loaded to the computer. Well, you can imagine that wasn't very prime for continuous delivery. Yet over time, and the computers weren't connected and things like that, but over time, the tools are there to really make delivery of software continuous. And more important is also the way we think about software delivery has changed from like these big chunks and lots of discrete planning to kind of more of an ongoing evolution. So I think both kind of this cultural and concept changes as well as the available tools to do that.
So you mentioned software being like sucked into the system as soon as you write it or something like that. I think that's a really like fascinating way of looking at the world. It reminds me of when this was in the early days of Circle, and we no longer do this, when we would actually like REPL into production servers and run code from our editors. But I'd love to hear more about like how you think that's going to go.
Well, if I had the exact solution, I might have been sitting here with HeavyBit. So I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but I'm just kind of thinking that both in terms of the readiness of the servers as well as the tools where you kind of, as you edit, the thing already like becomes something that is runnable. So you kind of, what you write, I don't know, maybe it's like a different language or whatever that is, but everything you write is already runnable. And, it's quickly kind of propagates itself into the system even without kind of, you can imagine your, I don't know, like editor is already connected to everything else and things, I don't know, maybe there's not going to be even an editor, right? But, you kind of express something and immediately it gets kind of propagated into some sort of a machine code or something that then runs into, that can get sucked into the system itself. So
it's funny, this gels a lot with the concept I've been thinking about a lot. And I think when Sam Stokes was on, we talked about this a little bit. And the phrase I use is for sculpting applications. And the idea is basically that you're kind of editing a live system at a much, much higher level than it is today. You're not you're not building containers and deploying them and orchestrating them. You're writing something that has almost no accidental complexity, no difference between the problem that you're expressing and the distributed system that sits under it is sort of hidden in some way.
Right, exactly. So you kind of express yourself at a much higher level than is available today.
And it's funny. I've been writing a lot of Haskell code recently, and I'm shocked to discover that actually the difference between the ideas that I'm trying to express and the ideas that I have to express are like they're vastly different. And there's a lot of accidental complexity in a way that I thought they weren't supposed to have. It's very irritating.
Yeah, so it's definitely ways to go, and I'm sure. I don't know, maybe we'll look back at this conversation and say, well, it kind of evolved in a different way. But I think the concept of software development is going to continue to change actually quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think of it is just stuff is moving further and further up the stack. I think like VMware was the first pass of we don't really have to care about the machines. We'll just care about virtualization. Then Docker is the next evolution.
Right.
What made you move from VMware to Docker? What was the impetus to do this?
Oh, that's a good question. There's probably kind of like anything, like a personal reason and more of like a different reason. So on a kind of a software reason was that I've kind of thought that container seems to be like the next thing that's going to be relevant to software development. And
I hear it's the future.
Yeah, I heard it's the future too. I'm pretty sure it's the future.
I thought it was so 2015 at this point.
So kind of thinking, hey, this is how, and actually noticing that it came up more and more with users. So, I took notice of that and, loving to work on the bleeding edge. And, on a personal level, spent a lot of time at VMware already and was ready for a change and really wanted to work on a smaller company. So, so it was a combination of that.
It's funny. So we ran into a friend of yours from VMware, Adam, and I've noted that I know a lot of people who worked at VMware, and I admire them all very much. So what do you think was it about that culture that has produced so many great people? I put yourself, Martine, Jocelyn, Peter Kazanji at like just great, great, great people. Oh,
thank you for saying that. Here's kind of my thoughts. So first of all, VMware was an amazing company and is an amazing company and had an amazing founders, amazing idea. And I had an interesting run. So I think like with any company like this, it attracted good people to join. So good people were interested in joining. So there was a collection of good people. And I think culturally it was a very good company. It was very much engineering led. But, there's something about being in successful companies that really helps you understand how it needs to be done when it's done right.
Yeah.
And I think many of us that had the fortune to be part of the VMware run, had kind of learned, okay, well, here is how it looks like when it looks right. And here is what it means to win. And, and that kind of, I think, helped many of us as we went on.
It's funny you hear the same thing about early stage startups, that like a useful thing for a founder is to have been at like a Series B stage company. And it sounds like you're kind of saying the same thing, that like for executives who are leading the 50-person company to be the 1,000-person company, having been at VMware and seen that working is like a very useful thing to have had.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely gives you a real context and example of how it should be done or can be done successfully, and that kind of always a reference point that you have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I look up to Diane Green so much in my fantasies. I'm the next Diane Green, and because she did so much at VMware. What do you think were the most important cultural lessons there in terms of a successful team?
I mean, she's obviously amazing. I have to confess that while I was interviewing while she was there, I took this long break before I started. So I actually never worked when she was there, but kind of her legacy was everywhere, right? And first of all, it's like I said, it was very technical company that really appreciated good thinking and good engineering, and that's always been the case and still is the case. And very much, I mean, I even watch her now and like focus on partnerships, and kind of win-win seems to be part of what she was doing, and I think that have helped the company a lot. And I'm not the right person probably to kind of talk about that, but like I said, culturally the company has always been amazing, and definitely I think the founder set the stage for that.
And then how much of that are you able to like bring over to Docker, or how much of Docker's culture is already set by sort of the culture that's there before you arrived?
Yeah, it's kind of one of these things that there is a culture that is there, and also a culture that's kind of set by the founders and set by the team that's already there and set by the people that you kind of keep bringing. So every time so even though you bring concept from the culture you're familiar with, it's always some sort of this combination of things. It's not like that you really kind of really take up culture and just copy it. It's almost like impossible to do. It's almost every company has its own setup. So it means that it ends up with like a different culture. But, like obviously understanding what it means to work in enterprise, understanding what it means to work with enterprise customers is like, we've got a ton of that in the VMware University.
Right.
So you're talking about the lessons learned of selling to enterprises. I think everybody would love those lessons if you could condense them down.
Yeah. Okay. This is kind of my view of it. So first of all, obviously, you need to understand what they need and partner really, really, really well with your customers, especially with the first early few, is kind of work with them very closely and kind of keep defining your product as you go with them. And then, enterprise, they often want a lot of these, what we call enterprise features. Like they have specific needs for security, for compliance, and just something that you must understand, that even though it's maybe you don't feel it like as a core capability of your invention, that it just has to be there so they can accept it in their org. The fact that they have a lot of systems already existing or vendors they already work with, and making sure you can integrate with that and appreciate that is quite important. Understand the pace in which they can take software and will take software. I'm assuming here, like, on this end, there's differences, obviously, from on-prem and in the cloud. But so I mean, a lot of these things. And if you're really trying to create a company, maybe I'm a bit jaded because at VMware that I done a lot with like partners. I really believe that it's like a village, and you have to really understand how to work with others, because it's very rarely that you're like the only software they will use. So understanding how to partner both on the business side and on the technology side.
So there's an interesting sort of question that I have there around developing software and developing out like the feature set around, I guess, kind of the tightrope that Docker has to walk around partners and around the space and around open source and around sort of high valuations and that sort of thing. It must be quite a challenge to build software under those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely, to say the least. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it is very challenging. But I have to kind of say, I wish the world could see how true we are to the community and how much the team works with the community, with the open source community. There's the incoming rate of PRs is just like mind blowing, and the team is so dedicated in like understanding what is needed, what the actual users want, and incorporating that and really listening to it. I mean, sometimes to the effect that internal teams, they also part of the community. I mean, I had last year I actually gave a talk on like Docker community and how we deal with it. And one of the points there was that actually our internal team is a part of the community as well. So they also have to submit PRs, and they also have to kind of go through the process. And, I just wish it's something that was maybe more known. And the other thing I would say, the community also is built of different parts. I mean, there's like users that actually consume your software. There may be developers that build on top of it. And there's also vendors that have all sorts of needs from your software that are legit as well. But so it's not kind of a one thing. It's not like you're talking to like a one person that is like community person.
Right.
It's a very complex collection of people and companies and different goals.
Right. The one that I find fascinating is where, the sort of Kubernetes, which is trying to use Docker as a format, but obviously Docker wants to be much more than that, and possibly wants to have the role of what Kubernetes does with Swarm. And so there's the need to simultaneously be like, I don't want to necessarily say good partners, but like, partners with that along the same time as trying to build a competing product in the same space.
I mean, we definitely are thinking ourselves more of beyond just the container format, and like we provide today more of a platform. Again, like mostly listening to what users want. But I will also tell you that we very much have the philosophy of batteries included but removable. So many of these components that we know, like networking, storage, orchestration, and we're going to even include others. We know that other people want to innovate. We totally allow that, and we actually build the system in a way that encourages that, and we're going to continue to improve that. So there's recognition that there might be users and customers and vendors that are interested in a different solution.
We were saying before that we think you have one of the hardest jobs in the Valley.
Oh, I think I have one of the more fun jobs in the
Well, it's not an easy job to balance the needs of all those constituents.
That's for sure. And like you said, it's very much under the microscope.
Right.
Often people kind of have opinions and looking and writing, so that kind of everything is sometimes magnified in
I had this experience a little bit at Mozilla, so I really liked where you were saying that the other teams are just community members, because at Mozilla it really did feel like there was a difference between the people who were employees of Mozilla, that they had a lot more privilege than external community members. But it was interesting that at Mozilla you'd frequently get someone saying something on a mailing list or something like that. It was a very open company, and it being taken as gospel by some member of the press very often, or I mean, there wasn't as much Hacker News, but the modern equivalent is Hacker News. And I can imagine someone at Docker saying, making a comment on a PR that gets completely blown out of proportion, or that people read their own nuance or read between the lines in just the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of recently I've heard of this PR that was rejected because of some security issue, but it was again blown out of proportion. It was a discussion. It's like, oh, it's rejected because of something else, but so it's kind of you're right. Sometimes things are misread or misunderstood.
Our industry is one that has a lot of negativity and perhaps lack of empathy. There's always a willingness to look for the worst case in what people do, and especially on Hacker News and that kind of thing. So the idea of making something as contentious as a big open source project is frankly terrifying.
But you find it fun.
Well, not everything is fun, but what kind of the big titles is what sells, and my people like a bit of controversy, and like I'm sure everybody reads those ones that are like, so it's such and such that, or this, like, collapsing, or people always are drawn to this like more dramatic titles. So I think that's kind of why they're being pursued and being commented, and
Yeah, so which ties me back to, what do you think is the biggest change besides more scrutiny and Hacker News between, making a software project back at General Magic or Ariba and now?
Oh, wow. So much has changed that it's not even funny. But first of all, what's available in terms of tooling is like unbelievable. And even like a simple thing, like actually my first job at General Magic was to write a web browser for the device. I mean, because the internet was kind of happening and they're like, oh, we really need a web browser for this device. So, and it was like, oh, can you go? Like, we're just HTML3, I think, was coming out. And it was like, can you go? Like, I went to the library to borrow a book about HTML so I can, write a web browser to parse it. And can you imagine like
just like going to the library?
so like today it's
Stack Overflow.
Yeah, it's just available. So the information that's available to you, the tools that are available to you. There is no like starting a company before was like a big deal, but today like you have the cloud and you can really quickly just get like compute resources and storage resources. Like, again, all of these things were like a big deal. And so it was really harder. And this is kind of coming back to continuous deliveries. The tools are available now to really develop in like smaller chunk with higher speed and more precision. And, it's just great. And, I remember Ariba, when I was at Ariba, the Agile methodology kind of came out and everybody were like, whoa, what is that thing? And we actually went to get training. And our trainer was one of the people that actually wrote the Agile manifesto. And he was like, so like...
Which one was he?
I want to say... I don't want to like misspell the name, so how about I'll check later. But very much hardcore in kind of believing in this methodology, and we're all like, "What are you talking about?" And like today, it's so clear for people to work in like small teams and all these things that people do today. So, but it was very waterfally those days.
Well, I think a lot of the agile stuff has been watered down. Isn't exactly the word I'm looking for, but like. Back in the day, they talked a lot about extreme programming, and there was a lot of zealotry. And I feel that Agile has gotten to the entire industry now, but the vast majority of it doesn't approach it with the same zealotry as it was originally.
Well, I think the thing I would say, though, is that a lot of people think that Agile is kind of a religion that you have to implement in a very particular way. And I actually found that any implementation of Agile is highly modified, and that you find the Agile version that is suitable for your product, for your team, for your culture, for, and all of these things. So... I kind of more subscribe to like, these are all like ideas and methodologies, and you take from it what you want and you adopt it in the way you want.
Right.
Yeah. What were the biggest gains you saw after adopting it?
Agile?
Yeah.
Probably so many things, but probably one of the biggest is how closer we got to the customer. I remember we started having the shorter milestones and connecting to customers really often. And really kind of think about developing the software in like smaller chunks and smaller teams, and have a team that has the QA inside. And again, today it kind of sounds obvious, but it wasn't obvious for us then. And and I remember like there was one time we were working on a feature, I think it was Purge and Archive, and we had this brilliant idea. Well, first we're going to implement Purge, and then we're going to do Archive. And we're like talking to this customer, and he was like, "What are you talking about Purge? Like we have to save all this data. We need it for like compliance reasons or whatever." But like in the engineering mind, it sounded brilliant, because first you figure out how to get rid of all this data, then you figure out how to store it, and like it seemed like perfect solution. But the early conversation with customer, we're completely on the wrong track. Because you asked me about like the enterprise. What does it mean to enterprise? I guess one thing that I wanted to add that I kind of forgot, that you need a lot of patience in the enterprise, because there is the enterprise adoption cycle. And it is what it is, both in terms of like selling, but also in adopting software. So just something that, if you're on an enterprise journey, just take like about a few kind of patience pills or whatever you can find in the pharmacy.
Well, it's funny that you talk about, on the one hand you've got like this furious rate of PRs coming in, and on the other hand you're got the enterprise life cycle, which is much slower, and there's the need to do both, I guess. Yeah,
you still have to kind of go through the enterprise adoption cycle, especially for things that go for production, especially for like bigger corporations, and you kind of subject to all of that.
Yeah, it's funny. I find so we we sell to enterprises and we'll have our champions and they're like, okay, how do I get procurement to sign off of this?
Yeah.
How do I get legal to sign off on this? Like they want to buy, but they have this.
Yeah, they have to work through their system.
Yeah, that's exactly that. They're like, I need to let this system digest this project.
Right. And like, go through all the approvers and all the reviews and all the whatever internal compliances. Yeah.
There was one point where we started selling to enterprise, and one of the steps that you needed to buy was that your purchaser had to have a GitHub account. And it's like, well, how do we sign up? Well, it's you go into the thing and you fill in the credit card, and it's very straightforward. And it's like, well, how do we get in? Like, they need a GitHub account. We're like, oh.
Well, and the thing is that your purchaser might be somebody.
Exactly. It was someone. It was, and very often the accountants or the people involved in the accounting department do not have a GitHub account. But that's what you get if you want to see billing.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a procurement person who I'm actually friendly with. I was like, how's your day? And she's like, oh, I'm working on this. I'm working on this other project. I'm also buying advertising from the New York Times. And I'm also buying,
Yeah.
So, I mean, she's procuring everything up to and including Lunch Darkly and newspaper advertising.
Wow.
Yeah. And like companies can also do like all sorts of things that still want to use your technology. So they don't necessarily as advanced with everything as maybe like we sometimes feel in the Valley, right? So you can go in a company that maybe does, I don't know, like manufacturing equipment or, some construction. And yes, they want to use like new technology, but, like it's kind of you talking to a whole different world, and you need to have a bit of language translation there to understand how to go through it.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's super powerful about this, the bottom-up developer adoption. Like, there's going to be someone, in that manufacturing or construction company who's installing Docker on their own machine, or who's installing GitHub or Circle CI on their little project. And somewhere, 3 steps up and 2 steps across a hierarchy, there's someone that they have to convince to buy that eventually, but that they're able to get it going, get it working without having to get that conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the beauty of like developers bringing in software and the ease of adoption and open source and all these different things. And by the way, SaaS has the same attribute because it's so easy to open an account and just to get going. And, in AWS, have they all have the same attribute. It's so easy to get going. I mean, I remember a few companies ago when we started using Salesforce, and nobody really decided to like start using Salesforce, but somehow we discovered there's like a bunch of people with like Salesforce accounts, and it was like, oh, there's this tool, and that was then we were like, oh my God, we have to move our software to SaaS. And it was actually at Ariba because it just seems such a brilliant way to of everybody consuming software.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I remember the cost of sales used to be so much higher because you had to have a lot of people who did just stuff like you had solution engineers who would just go and do the POC.
Yeah.
Like, so we had an entire staff of people to do POCs because that was the only way, proof of concepts, because that was the only way that a customer could see the software.
And would people pay for the proof of concept?
No, but it did inflate the actual final purchase price.
Right, because you have to pay for all the previous proof of concepts that didn't work out.
Yeah, so you'd have to do these 2 to 3 month proof of concepts, and it was probably the same at Ariba.
Yeah, like when you see like a company kind of at this upswing, that normally means that they had a lot of these like long cycles that went with companies and they all matured at once. And it's true that once something becomes very, very prevalent, then it's kind of just easier. And I've definitely seen it in a couple of companies I've been at. It's just easier to close an account and sell and get adoption, et cetera, et cetera. But like going back to kind of talking about open source and SaaS, I think it's just so important when you write software to understand, if you write software to the enterprise, what's your in, and how would you kind of, especially can you find like an easy way in?
Yeah, totally. So you two have more in common than I thought. You both have written web browsers.
Oh.
I don't know if I'd say I've written web browsers. I've taken part in the late stage work on a JavaScript engine, so Mozilla's JavaScript engine.
And you thought about working at Docker?
Yeah, oh, yes. So
that's a good story. I have to hear.
So in 2011, I was leaving Mozilla.
Oh, wow.
And I sent an email to the YC list saying I need a job, and like 100 people replied. And I think one of the more interesting ones was Solomon, who's the founder of Docker. And at the time, the company was .cloud. So like this was long before Docker. Like dotCloud was a Heroku competitor. And so I went in, I talked to Solomon and I interviewed with a couple of engineers, and they had me do the take-home project. Take-home project was build a distributed web crawler on dotCloud. And I had never really built web stuff before, and I had definitely not built like distributed system stuff. And so dotCloud was my first real experience with that, and it was amazing. Like I loved dotCloud so much. It was such an amazing product. And then they're like, yeah, you don't have enough distributed systems experience, sorry.
Funny.
Do you regret it, or were they right? Or
Well, I mean, if I'd taken that job, I would have built Circle.
yeah.
It's funny. I look at like all the jobs that I was applying for. Like I was applying for Dropbox, and then there's other companies that have gone nowhere that I was convinced were going to be amazing. But like if I had one that I was super excited about that took me, I wouldn't have built Circle. So it all works out in the end.
Well, you see, it all worked out. And obviously, Salmon is brilliant. So that's
Yeah.
kind of, he had, from there, went and did Docker, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of, you never know where things are going. So it's always kind of in retrospect when you go back and you're like, oh, like that step led to that, led to that. So,
Yeah.
Well, so you've been at Docker not since the very beginning, but since you said it was 50 employees.
About, I think between 50 and, I don't know, maybe by the time I joined a bit more.
How many are you now?
Oh, we were over 250, so quite a bit. Wow. So, yeah, I mean, in a couple of years, we went, like, I guess we multiplied ourselves by five times. So it's like, yeah.
That's still a small company at 250 people.
It is, but it's
Well, by
VMware standards,
By
I guess.
VMware standards, actually, VMware is like, again, it also went through like multiplying itself every single year. That's been challenging. I remember kind of what somebody pointed out. Do you realize that in like it was one of the all hands in this room, there are more new people that just joined this year than all the people that joined the previous 10 years combined. It was like, oh my God, that is true. And it's kind of tells you how much you have to reinvent yourself when you go through this growth, because there's so many new people every year.
Any lessons learned or things you'd like to share about that experience?
Obviously, a lot is learned, but I would say the biggest thing is to understand that at every phase you're like a little bit different company, and you again have to reinvent yourself, because what was true for 50, not true for 250, and definitely when I left VMware was 18,000 people or something like that.
Whoa.
Definitely not true for 18,000 people. So you kind of have to keep reinventing yourself at every single stage. But and I think it's so important also to have that. We talked about this winning gene or whatever, is understanding how, but have kind of this resolve of like, oh, this is hard, but we can do it, and we will do it, and we will win. That's like very good DNA to have.
Yeah, my advisor, Sean Burns, he gave me really good advice. He said, the things you do from 1 to 10 will not work when you go. You're going to need different things to go from 10 to 100. And he wasn't talking about employees. He was talking about revenue, scalability, anything. And then 100 to 1,000, like every unit of 10, you have to change your techniques.
Yeah, it's kind of this snake, right, that keeps on peeling a skin and grow a new one, as So yeah, you absolutely.
Yeah. So we started talking about, Paul, what were you talking about? React?
We were talking about interviewing.
Yeah,
and
hiring.
Yeah, so Mariana was saying about your, I don't know, can we reveal your interview question?
No.
Okay.
How about just say it's a basic concept in,
All right, so if you're interviewing for Docker, you should know basic computer science concepts.
Is it how many bits are in a byte?
Pretty much.
Well, actually, that kind of depends on, never mind. So the discussion that we're having is that I don't really believe that it's necessarily important to have basic computer science concepts to be an engineer. And in particular, there's a subset of engineers that I meet who know almost nothing about CS, right? They've maybe learned front-end concepts or they're able to like string things together very quickly, and they have focus. And those two things allow them to build, very large things, especially if they have product vision as well going into that. But they wouldn't be able to like answer a whiteboard coding question.
Yeah, and actually how we started talking about it is because I didn't know about the story Paul was saying of how he interviewed a bunch of companies and didn't get accepted. And I'm like, wow.
I got some of them.
Well, some of them, but sorry. The ones that you didn't. And I said, wow, it's such a miss because here's like this amazing.
Was also rejected from Dropbox.
Oh, so here's this amazing guy, right? That went ahead and founded such a great company, and that clearly the interview has missed that.
I mean, no one in the industry knows what they're doing around interviewing. Like,
I agree.
Google had this number that came out recently that 50% of the people they hire after this, grueling and intense process turn out not to work out. It's like 50%.
50%. And Google is famous for its interviews.
So it's not that they don't work out, but like the correlation, 50% of the people they hire are successful in the way that they were expecting them to be, or something along those lines.
That's crazy. It reminds me of, so they have the SATs in the States. And there's always this thing like the SATs are not a correlation with eventual success.
Okay.
I think so much of being successful is the ability to work well with other people.
Yeah, and have persistence, because you have difficulties and you want to overcome them, and be creative.
I think focus is a big one.
Yeah.
Like it's very, very easy to keep chasing the next shiny thing, and especially in companies, and I think a lot of companies are like this today, where you're kind of not quite encouraged, but like certainly not discouraged from having side projects, and sort of you come in with a PR that you weren't told to work on, and maybe it's a good thing or maybe not. And so like there's this sort of the next shiny thing syndrome, and if you can avoid that and you can stay focused on your thing, you can deliver so much stuff. And if you keep going for the next shiny thing, often you'll have like 10, 15, 80% finished projects that never actually cross the line, and as a result you've made nothing.
There's several years ago, there was this blog that came out that talked about, and I'm forgetting the source of that, but talked about how when you hire, you need to hire smart people that know how to get things done.
Yep.
Oh, that's Joel Spilkey.
Yeah. And I think it's so right. But I would add to that also like the soft skills. But this kind of goes to your point, is that if you wander around, you will never get anything done. And maybe each one of the things that we're doing were brilliant, but it doesn't matter because nobody gets to enjoy it.
And 90% of a brilliant project is zero.
Yeah. I was talking with a friend who works at a big software company I won't name, and he said he loved Agile because before they would have these year-long projects, and what would happen 8 months in was the business would change their mind.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they basically had gone.
By the time they released it, it was obsolete.
Well, they couldn't even. They would work for 8 months, and the business would say. And in defense, because I'm business now, like the market changes.
Yeah.
They're like, whatever you started working on for 8, it's not what we want anymore. Work on this anymore. So they had this continual string of
the continuous non-delivery.
Yeah, continuous. Absolutely. So he loved Agile because he said, we break it into smaller chunks, but it's guaranteed to get done.
Yeah.
I think a lot of engineers like not having structure. And one of the things that I think is best about Agile and the various tracks of Agile is that structure helps you get things out the door, helps you get them to customers. When you look at the product function, there's the get things to 5 customers, there's get things to 50 customers, there's get things to all your customers. Like it's not just writing code that's involved in that.
Yeah.
And you need that kind of structure to be able to.
Yeah, I mean, for the daily scrums, and like definitely when you do like this burn down charts, you'll get to a lot of details. And
right.
It's but it doesn't feel quite as suffocating, Well,
I mean, if you tell an engineer that like, oh, we're going to have a daily scrum and you're going to have to be in at a certain time to get to that, and then we're going to have a burn down meeting and there's going to be like 2 weeks and like you just keep going. They're like, oh my God, meetings. And it's like, I just want to write code. Let me write code.
What if you tell them that you bring chocolate?
I was going to say something about chocolate, and then I started thinking about like the culture of like goodies and I'm iffy on
you
that
break
sort of
shiny thing to yourself.
I mean, I'm the worst at this. Like I need external pressure to stay focused on a particular thing. I don't know if it's ADD, but like it feels like really bad ADD, and like having customers as the external pressure was like really, really useful to like to like getting things done in the early stage. And then when you're at the stage where there's like less external pressure or different external pressure, I guess it's not specific. I found it much, much more difficult to get things done.
I think the lack of customers can be very awful for projects ever getting delivered.
Right, right. As soon as you have customers, it's like, oh, of course you're going to get things done because there's someone yelling for it.
Well, you were going to say something.
No, I was saying like that provides you the focus you need because we talked about being focused and suddenly there's a deadline, there's a need, there's a person. So then you're like, oh, I have to be focused on that. And
Yeah. Nothing like urgency to get something across the deadline.
I totally agree. I think we all need that.
Yeah. So something I found interesting is, so Paul today was showing off his shiny new green card.
Yay, you can't kick me out now.
Congratulations.
Which, by the way, is green.
I was actually surprised that the green card was physically green.
Yeah, so what made you both decide to come to the States? I mean, Ireland has a really booming software industry, as does Israel. What made you decide to come here?
Yeah, so actually, I told you that my first engineering job was in the military. In Israel, it's compulsory. So I went to this program where I went first to school. And when I graduated, I did my compulsory service. And I served for a while. And then I did what many people do after they finish their military service. I went traveling, and we went with my husband, went to India and Nepal and Thailand. And we spent several months backpacking. Then we had friends here in the Bay Area. We decided to stop by, even though it's not really on the way. But when you kind of take a big plane ride, everything seems on the way. And we stopped here. She was doing like PhD at Stanford, and he was working here. And we came here and it was like, wow, we love that place. We were both engineers, and we're like looking at all the companies here, and it just seemed like unbelievable place and it still is, for people that do software. And we kind of stayed here, and I still think it's the most amazing place for software development. And
it's fascinating. I've exactly the same story.
Really?
Yeah. So I wasn't with my husband in Nepal.
Were you in
How about India?
Were you in the Irish military?
Yeah, very famous. It's a very stealth military. People don't really know that much about it.
I'm not going to make a joke here.
So what happened was I got into I got a paper accepted in a conference in Hawaii. And from Dublin, San Francisco is on the way. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to fly through San Francisco, and I'm going to see if anyone will let me give a talk. And so I convinced the guy I knew at Google to give a Google Tech Talk. And then I gave a talk at Facebook, and I gave another one at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And so when I came over, obviously, like my grant is paying for all the flights, and you could stay in a fancy hotel. But instead, I saw this on Hacker News. I saw someone advertised their hacker house in Palo Alto. This is about 2009, and it was on this site called airbedandbreakfast.com. And so I stayed like literally on an airbed in a hacker house in Palo Alto, and all the guys in the house were going through Y Combinator. Wow. And I was just like, oh my God, there's all these people who are just like building their ideas. And there was no money at the time. Like it was 2009. It was right after the
2008. Yeah. There was no money.
There was no money. The only ones from that batch who were really able to fundraise were Airbnb. But everyone was just like building their stuff, and they were super excited. And in Dublin at the time, I mean, you described that Dublin is the sort of second city of tech in a certain way.
There's Intercom.
Yeah,
Circle CI has an office there,
and every San Francisco company has their second office is in Dublin. Their European headquarters, but I mean at the time it wasn't quite like that. Google was there, and sort of Facebook maybe was kind of getting set up around then, but it wasn't really the same. And the things that mattered in Ireland when I was sort of in my 20s were, real estate and construction and finance and software. It's just like no one gave a shit. And so you get somewhere where like suddenly, software is everything.
And not only that, but cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was like immediately I was like, I have to move here.
Yeah, you can write software and be cool at the same time.
Right.
Like,
It was shocking.
So I was not in the military.
What?
I have been to Nepal, but it's funny because I moved to Texas as part of the .com bust. So my company got bought. I moved there. And in hindsight, I realized...
You were here before the bust, and then you had to move to Texas.
Yeah.
Wow, that's the worst.
Oh, it was in Austin. But I realized now that it was Austin that was still kind of working its way out of the .com dregs itself. Mm-hmm. Like literally Intel had started to build a huge headquarters downtown. And then the recession hit, and there was this empty shell because they did not have the money to finish it, and they didn't think they would ever have the workers to be in it.
Wow.
So finally, they just dynamited the whole building because it was an eyesore. I mean, so this is the state of Austin. And I came back to San Francisco because it was the same thing. I was like, wow, people are building cool stuff here.
What year did you come back?
I came back in 2007,
Right.
just in time for the 2008 recession.
Yeah, nice.
But it was the same sort of feeling of Austin at the time was dead.
I think it seems like we all came here for the love of software and love of tech and love creating product, and honestly, there's so many people like this here. It's just is amazing. Like every day, and like the people you meet, the people you work with. I don't think there's a second place like that.
Well,
No? Okay.
So it's
So that would have been a perfect time to end, Paul. But
I mean, we still can.
that would have been like a perfect.
We need controversial.
And then Paul jumps in with the
I kind of feel that the feeling that I had in 2009 of like people just into software and building things, I feel that it's not what San Francisco is anymore. Like I feel that it's kind of a gold rush now, and it feels like what I imagine New York felt like during the finance rush of 2006, 2007, where just kind of like busloads of graduates just like move here to chase their dreams. And I don't necessarily feel that that's a bad thing. I mean, I chase my dream here, and it's a great place for people to do it. It doesn't feel like it did in 2009 when I wanted to move here.
But do you agree they're like both people that not just chasing, but really want to do like great things?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, people are. I think people are sort of moving here for the same reason, but it's not the same people. So it's like you were talking about.
Are you telling them to get off your lawn?
No. So I'm emphatically not trying to tell them to get off my lawn. I'm just saying that
But if you were to have a lawn,
I'm just saying that the garden party isn't the one that I used to enjoy going to.
I guess I have. I mean, in the same. We've been here. I haven't been here as long as you, but I think there's always the sense that the new people are not as cool as the people who've been here for a while.
Yeah, the people that came here in the 90s, they're like the coolest, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they don't really talk to us. They own all the property and.
She's here doing a podcast with us.
Fair enough.
You're like the cool people.
I do think I completely agree with you that I feel like doing a startup now is like being in abandoned Seattle in the 90s or being a screenwriter in LA or being an actor in New York. Like what all these four things have in common is there's basically zero qualifications to claim you're doing any of these. You can just say I'm writing a screenplay if you've opened Microsoft Word once and written.
I mean, it's kind of the beauty of it, or at least I feel it was the beauty of it when there was very few people writing screenplays, or there were very few bands, or whatever analogy we want to pick. But
I think New York has always had actors, though.
Has it? Okay. For people who just love software, I'm not sure San Francisco is like the most amazing place anymore.
Where is the most amazing place?
I don't know. I don't know if there is one.
This sounds like the beginning of a movie where like Paul.
Paul gets in an RV and drives around America for a couple of months, figuring out writing my novel or my great programming language.
Finding the Xanadu of development.
Yeah.
Well, we really enjoyed having you here.
I had a lot of fun.
Final?
As for the record, I still think it's in the Bay Area, but
And she was in the military, so I'm going to agree with her.
Yeah, you have to agree with me.
I guess I should too. Veiled threat.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by HeavyBit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of Launch Darkly.
To learn more about HeavyBit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.